definitely tune into those. But I'll be talking about Memoria Project, which I'm sure many of you have already seen, but we'll be doing a deep dive into reimagining a classic. Just a brief overview of myself and my career so far. I'm a senior environment artist at Rare currently, and I'm also the lead on the Memoria Project. So at the moment, I'm coming up to 6 years in the industry. I think August was 6 years, and I'm currently working on Everwild. The past titles include Kane Bridge of Spirits, Sea of Thieves, Rainbow Six Siege, Elite Dangerous, and of course, experience points, which hopefully everyone here knows of experience points, otherwise I'd be a bit shocked. And of course, at the moment, I'm working on the Memoria Project, which we're going to be diving into. And I've put this here in case anyone has any questions about maybe living and working in other countries. I'm actually working for Rare from Canada. So if you have any questions, feel free to pop those in the Q&A. Just a brief overview of the contents of this lecture. So we'll touch on what Memoria Project actually is. We'll also go into like updating a PS1 game to 2022 graphics. And we'll dive a little into the vertical slice that the team created, as well as the art direction of the project and how that's evolved. And then we'll look into UE5 and how we've been utilizing that and focusing our efforts on rebuilding a small portion of the game. Small segment on workflows and pipelines, and then a little bit on motivation that might be useful for some people. So Memoria Project, what is this actual project that I've been working on for the past year and a half, 2 years? It's a non-playable passion project. So it's a non-profit, essentially love letter that's created as a tribute to the original, which was made in 2000 or 2001. It's a proof of concept. So we're just trying to envision what this game would look like if it was created with modern technology, modern like graphical capabilities. We're currently a team of 40, so that covers various departments from environment art to character art, animation, rigging, UI, voice acting. I maybe missed a few, but kind of resembles a real like game dev production. And the goal essentially is to rebuild Alexandria, which is just the first 15 to 20 minutes of the original. So nothing substantial, especially since the original game is about 40 hours, give or take. And we're hoping to reimagine this with like modern systems. So rather than the original, which is the locked camera, we want to have a fully explored a 3D camera system that the player can say and look anywhere and everywhere. And we want to include some systems kind of build upon the original. So dialogue systems, interactable objects, things like that. Kind of just essentially take what the original had, but improves upon it. And of course, we want to maintain the art style that the original has. So we want to play to the team's strengths, stylization, and try and steer away from realistic, which seems to be the trend in the industry for remix. So updating a PlayStation 1 game, like where does that all start? It's a pretty big task for anyone, mainly because we all have like rose-tinted glasses when we think back to the games we played as children. And to be honest, they don't look as good as we remember them. Like they, for the most part, look pretty awful. So you kind of have to really study what those games were at those time. And that kind of comes down to the reference. And in a task like this, it's just imperative to get as much possible, especially from the original source material. You can see the reference board in the background there, which is my personal one. I just threw tons of images on the board and slowly became comfortable with where things were off by heart. The reference, I mean, everyone talks about it when they write an article or just help another artist. You always ask if they've got a reference. But why is it important? Especially in this scenario, we just need to understand how things are assembled rather than using our imagination or what we think is correct. Like you need to know how things are built. In the case of FF9, the original's got really limited details. It's kind of difficult to understand what everything is, like individual assets such as like what's in front of these statues. Don't really know what that is. But But what we can get are the main forms and the structure and the layout. So that really helps with set dressing, blocking environments out. But in terms of minute details, it's pretty difficult. Some of them are readable, such as the hats. So, we can build upon that. And we've got like a food stand over here. But over here, I don't really know what that is. So some of them are just unrecognizable. But the ones that can be made out, such as the flower market over here, we can go in and actually get real world references of how like a flower stand would be assembled and kind of leverage that to build something in the style Memoria is. And it's kind of true to the original, but has a foundation that makes sense. Same for the wagon wheel. We can get forms here and use a real world object to get those details. I'm going to dive into a specific asset here, which Ranko, our lead prop artist, created. It's this large piano organ behind the ticket booth. It's only viewable from this angle, so that's all you get as an artist when you're given the task to make something in this scenario. Thankfully, there is a concept sketch available from one of the hidden art books, which does give a bit more information on like some of the smaller forms, the medium forms, but you still don't know what the back looks like. So it comes down to full artistic creativity here to interpret, what the rest of the asset looks like and make sure it feels coherent and consistent. And this is what Ranko ended up creating based on those two images and a few other like small references that he gathered. But you can sort of see like it resembles the original at first glance, and that's really what we're trying to capture, but also make sure that it feels updated and has its own style compared to what the original is. But enough about reference. I think the important thing here is just building a team. Like, how does Memoria actually work? Well, it started out as a team of two. It was just Dan and Colin. So Dan works on Multiverses, and Colin worked on Ghost of Tsushima. So them together create this image that you see here. It's rough block out, but they posted it on Twitter and it went viral. I joined the project as the third person and kind of helped make a roadmap of how it actually build Alexandria. So I wanted to treat this like an actual game production, not a portfolio project. I think at first Dan wanted to just have me work on an area and we would merge things together, but I really wanted to push this to be like a studio where we're working collaboratively. So that meant setting up source control, looking into different options. Also Discord, somewhere we could work together and not through email, because that's what we were using at first. So a collaborative space where we can exchange ideas and build a server that felt like a hub. And the other important thing was actually blocking out the whole city so we could scope how much work we actually have. And then from that, we could create tasks on Trello. And the other big thing is just recruiting new talent. So how would we go about that? And that led us to crafting the milestone discussion and kind of, what's the next 3 months going to look like? What can we showcase to the community? And that's where we fell onto the vertical slice idea, where we'll try and take what they've created and polish it in a vertical slice manner. So the vertical slice, I think loads of people here probably know what it is, but just very, very quickly for those that don't, it's just a small portion of the larger project that you intend to create. It essentially allows you to prove out all the elements. Any design needs, gameplay, things like that. But in our case, it was purely just an artistic vertical slice. We just wanted to see how it would look and what we could achieve with our direction. We've got two early work in progress images of the vertical slice. So yeah, step one is that VS, and Colin blocked out the bottom one. I think he did a fantastic job of capturing the magic. For what we are creating at this time, we use Toolbag 4 just for speed and iteration. And we just wanted to create a visual benchmark. It's going to guide the rest of the project, not dictate the project because we can enhance it, but just guide us with a starting foundation. We also wanted to establish workflows on like how we're going to assemble these buildings, because everything in FF9 is almost unique. Making a fully modular system was, when I first analyzed it, kind of difficult. It didn't make too much sense. So and we wanted to use this to attract hype and build hype and attract more talent. So we need to bring on new devs, and the best way to do that is show them progress and something exciting to work on. And there's no here just just emphasizing that the VS is super important because it does establish the quality for all departments that they should strive for, and it can only improve, usually anyway, in a perfect world. And this is the result that we had in the end, so the day and nighttime. I really like the nighttime one, but that's what we had and pushed forward with that. Hopefully the video works. So Trello, really quickly, just the video is just to showcase how many assets we actually had. I always tell my students to use Trello. Not all of them do, but it was a big task of just going through every region and just tasking up every asset that we saw. We also backlog everything that we think of because it could be a good idea in the future. And it generally provides a big picture of how much work there actually is, so you can plan accordingly, like future tasks, if there's scope, if people are going to get burnt out and things like that. And of course, you can highlight assets for multiple departments. So in this case, the treasure chest. We need an artist to make it. We need someone to rig the treasure chest and then someone to animate open and closing. We also need someone to actually integrate that in the engine for gameplay purposes. And yeah, that's the result of the vertical slice. So we'll go on art direction now. Naturally, there'll be tons of comparisons to the original and how we enhanced it. But also, I want to dive into how we use Dan's style and kind of infuse that into the environment art of the project. So those of you that don't know, Dan Eder is the project lead of Memoria, and this is one of his pieces. This is Vivi. He's one of the main characters in the game. And really, we want to build an environment that complements Vivi. Like, he needs to belong in the world, and the two should work together in harmony. But I really want to build the environments where they stand out from Vivi or vice versa. And also, I want to make sure that the art style is defined by Dan's existing work, not necessarily constrained by it, but we build upon it and kind of extrapolate some recipes. So, that overall recipe is there, but we can use it as a foundation. The first thing is strong silhouettes. Everything has a strong presence. Everything reads as it should in its own unique right. And that comes through the silhouettes of each asset. You've also got bold and simple colors. Dan doesn't really use any grunge or like high frequency noise in his texture work. I think if you color picked, you'd maybe get 2 or 3 colors maximum. And that's important for us, especially on the environment art side, because it means we can follow the same workflow, and we don't want to add too many colors or grunge. It's going to be very noisy. We want to really deploy that less is more aesthetic. And another small thing is tapering. Like, this is important, is every asset here has some sort of taper, be it a lot or small, and this just lends itself to that stylization aesthetic. And other mediums do this as well. Like Disney does this a lot in their movies as well as Pixar. Of course, if you combine this with no straight lines in his work, those going hand in hand, give it that handcrafted feel. So it lends itself to the world of FF9, where everything feels used and worn and aged. And of course, less is more. If we look at the original, I like to define it as stylized realism, sort of inspired by miniatures. That's usually the 2 big takeaways I take when I look at the original. There's a lot of aged, worn, and full of character in terms of the environment and the props. Everything has a purpose, and there's a lot of history and story behind everything. It's also somewhat medieval aesthetic. Like, I always think of Witcher, Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings, but they didn't exist when this was created, but that's the general vibe that I get. And it's important to know the original had 2D pre-rendered backgrounds, which obviously we're not doing, but the original had those. We need to consider that as a part of their art direction, how to use that. But how did we enhance it? So we want to make sure our assets are readable for roaming 3D camera. So players or whoever's running through our proof of concept is going to be able to look at the asset from every angle. So that's a big improvement. And we wanted to just focus on the shape, language, and form, so it's readable from a distance and up close. It doesn't change too much. You just get a lot more detail. And we remove that noise and the detail for better readability, essentially. But we do achieve the noise through dressing. So we don't put it in the individual asset. We just add a lot of props in the world to give it that messy feeling you would expect. And you can just see a couple of the sculpts and texture work from Ranko. And another important thing on the art direction is just a quick comparison. Our concept artist did a quick paint over of just adding a warp to the building, so it didn't have such straight, rigid lines. That small tweak just changes everything in terms of the composition and the layout and the structure of everything. So I just wanted to showcase how a small thing can change a lot. But rather than looking at the entire scene, we can cycle through some before and afters of what we remade. So if we take this poster stand, you can see the new version here. And if we bring in the updated ticket booth, you can see how we've kind of taken the original and really up-resed it. We've made some creative decisions, such as the horns, making them larger, but the main forms are there. The other one is the tavern sign. So the text is barely readable and the thing on the top is unrecognizable. So we infused some Easter eggs from the original game on the top sign, and we just tried to add a bit of paintwork, again, to really lean into that worn, used, aged aesthetic. And something a bit larger, how we kit bash existing pieces from a modular library to construct this larger piece here. Again, most of the forms are there. We just need to reimagine it in our version. We can go into UE5. So when we were at this point in the project, we had our vertical slice, and we wanted to move everything to UE5 and start planning how we're going to tackle the whole town. You can see VV here, all HD'd up. First things first is a game plan. So, this part of this talk is really trying to explain to you lot kind of how you would tackle a big task like this. It's sort of like game development in a sense where we've got multiple departments. We want to make sure that we can keep momentum going. So we wanted to highlight some issues with the original and how we would solve those. So straight off the bat, the original is really old. I don't know if Luan's in the call, but he'll know very well how there's so many images from the original where things just completely change from one shot to another, and it makes no sense.
It's nonsense.
Oh, there you go. He can probably rant about it in the chat. The other thing is fixed cameras. So as a creative, it's great that it's fixed because I can just see that one shot, but it's sort of sucks at the same time because I have no idea what the rest of the area looks like. So it falls on us to infuse the rest of the environment and make it consistent. Just a note on, I mentioned it previously, but the scale portions are everywhere, and I think Luan will rant about that. But some of the Alexandria castle changes scale based on different images you look at. So trying to recreate something to the correct size becomes problematic because you don't know which one to follow. And probably the biggest one is the original game is still available, so it's whatever we make is going to be scrutinized by fans under a magnifying glass. Thankfully, reception's been overwhelmingly positive, but that's definitely something that was a potential issue. And I've gone over some of the solutions, but the fact there's specific shots, there's only a few areas to make then, and we can start breaking it down. We're going to leverage Trello to build out those tasks. And we've already done the vertical slice, which kind of helped sign off on some workflows and art styles. So we already had a head start. And then we can do a very early block out in Unreal to sign off on a few things and begin exploring areas. Probably the biggest thing is that I've written all fans, but majority of the team are fans of the game, which is a big bonus. But also working with other industry professionals is another big win because you get to learn people that you maybe looked up to before. So with the UE5 aspect, we're going to run through all the different areas of Alexandria, what's available, and which one do we pick to work on at first and why. So if anyone here is trying to attempt a massive city or medieval town or something with tons of areas, hopefully this will be useful. This is my thinking behind the scenes. But with the UE5 proof of concept, we wanted to block out as early as possible, and you can see the rough ticket booth area. And the reason for this is you want to sign off with department lead, so the animation director, character lead artist, environment lead, anyone that's going to have team members beneath them, just to make sure that the blockout feels correct, consistent, and any issues that pop up, we fix them now. And we also want to migrate the vertical slice to UE5 so we can leverage all of those assets. We can build a shader library. That gives us a head start. And it gives us those assets to work with. We also want to break Alexandria into, just going to bring the image. I wanted to break Alexandria into areas. So you can see a handful here. This doesn't include any of the interiors. This is strictly the exteriors. But this helped us plan ahead, which areas should we work on? These are broken down in sort of similar chunks that make sense. And the one we did end up on was the courtyard, but I'll explain why as we go through the next slides. And the whole UE5 build, we wanted to build essentially a 2.0 of the vertical slice so we could match or improve the existing one and really test our pipelines to see if it will work in engine as my brain imagined. And it's just another shot of the part of the blockhouse so you can see the tavern and the ticket booth and some of the other areas. So the first area is the starting area. Actually, it's pretty unmemorable. You can actually skip this whole section in the original game, which I think that says everything you need to know. But it's a large open space. There's no real substance. There's not much information on anything. So it's a lot of guesswork, which basically boils down to is a lot of work for low reward. But how can we fix this? Well, my initial result that I came to was to just cut this area, like off the bat, and just really shrink it down. But Luan's been doing a fantastic job on the project, so we've revived this. But as an area to start with first, the second vertical slice wasn't a good choice. The Market Street is, it's where you first gain control of Vivi in the game, so it's pretty iconic. Could be a great first showpiece in UE5 to the community. Problem is, it's top-down view only. So again, we have to do a lot of guesswork of what the rest of the scene looks like and what these buildings look like. It's pretty just random noise. What's the structure? Where's the doors? Things like that. As mentioned, there's no information on the left side. Some of the set dressing is difficult to make out. And while the original outline sketch helps a lot, there's some elements that are different between the two. So again, as creative, we need to decide which one works best, but we don't want to change it too much where it doesn't look true to the original. It's essentially what works best from a creative decision. But again, it was probably the second option in terms of pursuing, but not the one we went with. But I do want to show a screenshot of what this looked like. I don't know how old this screenshot is, but it's just a small snippet of that street with some dressing and just kind of how it looks in an updated aesthetic, different camera angle, updated graphics. The tavern, we created it in our vertical slice, so I won't spend too much time here, but the key takeaways were that the camera lens distorts the buildings. We can't really achieve that, but it did lead us to realizing we needed to add some deformers to our buildings to really warp them, give them these unique papers. We don't really know what's behind this shot here, like where you're looking from, what's behind the camera. But that means with our new approach of doing a remake, we can actually start creating and thinking about what's behind the camera. So it's actually a bonus. And that's what leads me to this slide on the fountain district. So this is something that doesn't actually exist in the original. So it's a new location, and we wanted to expand the theme of the tavern, like where people would maybe leave after having a drink. It's a place to hang out potentially. People would gather and just socialize. And it also meant as part of the art team, like we could add a new feature piece, which was the fountain feature piece, and we really went to town with incorporating Easter eggs, like fan favorites, which is the chocobo. And this really gives full creativity to the art team because although we're making a reimagining of FF9, you know, sometimes you want to make new things that don't exist, and those are often like the more exciting parts because you're trying to find solutions to problems that didn't exist and you've created that problem. So this was a great opportunity to like expand the world of Alexandria but make sure it feels consistent with the original. In terms of pursuing it as the first area to build in UE5, definitely not the right thing to do, but it is an option in the future. And here's a GIF. This is a pretty old snippet from the build, definitely months and months old. But you can see Luan's castle in the background, by the way, and the fountain on the left, and the area that we built for the fountain back then. Another big area is ticket booth. This was the largest section in the game. Also has interiors, so you've got the inn, the art shop. The buildings are far more complex in this section compared to the rest. They're quite large. And also, there's no information on what's behind all of this. So, trying to solve that in addition to this large area was just a behemoth task. And also, it's extremely prop heavy. Like the sheer amount of props here is just very high, much higher than the rest of the city. And I'm sure some people are wondering, like, why not do that one first? And you can leverage the props for the rest of the city. And that's a fantastic idea on paper. But when you're working with people that are devoting their free time, like in the evenings or weekends, working on an area such as big as this, like it's going to take a long time. Motivation is going to dwindle. It's not a smart choice to expect people to put all that time in and not see anything for months and months or even a year. But the benefit is we'll tackle it last, and we'll already have a bunch of props from the other locations that we can use. And this again just helps with the motivation aspect. So we did not tackle this to begin with. But what I do want to show is the rough blockout that it started with. It looked like this in January 2022. And then by June, it got to this. See, that's about 6 months timeline, but realistically, it was about 5 to 6 weeks of like solid work if it was full-time development. It is a lot further than this, but I just can't show any like new images for like NDA reasons, essentially. Don't have one signed, but we're trying to keep it professional. Cool. And then the last few areas, very short, is the alleyway. It's very small in scope. The main problem here was it was stonework architecture. A lot of the stuff we had was wood. Didn't make too much sense to build a new set of assets. And probably the big thing was that it's a very rundown area. Like, I kind of wanted it to feel different to the rest of the city. Like it was a beaten up location, not very well looked after, which also meant we didn't really want to show this as the first environment that we created in UE5. It's not an exciting location by any means. And that extends itself to the pier. So you would come to this from this angle, which is the alleyway. So in addition to the alleyway reasonings, this one has rooftops visible. So we need to find a dressing solution for that. Do we add dirt, debris, things like that? The style continues from the alleyway. There's a lot of bespoke buildings, so we don't get much reusability from that for the rest of the level. And the same for the steeple. This one also has an interior space, so it needs to support BV characters. We didn't have a camera system working at that point, so this was like an instant write-off. There's a lot of illustrative work, 2D work that's required for some of these assets, such as the tower and the windows. And overall, it's a lot of unique pieces and an even more unique building, which we couldn't use anywhere else. So it kind of made no sense to put time into this so early on. I don't know if this is true. It looks like backface culling. If someone knows the answer, feel free to let me know. But generally, that's the sort of like result that it gives off where you're looking into the building. Part of it's cut off. It was this 2D background that were pre-rendered, but For our version, we would have the entire building. So again, we need to find a solution for all of that. This is the courtyard. I'm sure it looks very familiar to people that have, followed me or some of the posts that I make. So this is ultimately the one that we went with. It's a small contained space. We can still see a little bit of the ticket booth. So we did select this one for the next area. And unlike all of the other locations that I've gone through in these slides, this is probably the only one where we can see like 99% of what's in the shot. So it's a really good foundation for us to like start taking tasks and putting them in Trello, because we can see everything we need to make and don't have to do any guesswork. And if we do, it's very, very small. And it's also composed of assets that we already have. So at this point, we had roof pieces, we had wood, we had the landscape textures made. So it was very easy to just get going straight away with this. And just a small breakdown of the progression. So this was the super rough block out that we had, and you can just cycle through and you can see it slowly develop. So the original doesn't have any of the overgrowth. It's just something that we decided to include and use it selectively. And here you can see the straight rigid buildings that are perfect, even the roof pieces. We just try to break that up with individual shingles to really give it this broken feel, like it's been there for a long time, it's unkept. And then the curvature on some of the buildings really helps sell the style that we're going for. And then this is what we ended with. And then we have the night version. I will play the short trailer that we put together. You'll have to let me know if sound comes through, if anyone has a... Is that coming through? No? Okay, well,
it's all right for me if you want to keep playing.
Okay, cool. Well, it's only a minute. I will post the link after. So yeah, that's the trailer we put together for that vertical slice. I think it's still things to improve in that area, but overall the reception of that was extremely positive. It's kind of what got us the team that we have now. I think on YouTube it's at like 250,000 views. Very, very positive on that front. So that was a great result. And hopefully it just showcases all the different departments. Like, I know I'm talking a lot about purely environment art, but that had a lot of animation in there. The UI was created as well, and the music was actually written from scratch by Alex. I don't know how to say his surname, but I will pop it in the chat afterwards. So a lot of departments coming together to piece that together. We're doing good for time. Cool. So workflows and pipelines. This segment's quite short, but hopefully it's packed with enough information to give you some new ideas for future projects. So for the buildings, I looked a lot into just general medieval architecture. Like the Tudor time period was good, Victorian era as well. Anything with just like rustic wooden beams, like you can see in this image. I spent a lot of time thinking on how to best go about these buildings, since they had to be unique, but I wanted to make sure they were somewhat modular. So I went with the approach of having individual pieces that would form larger structures. So this is the wood set that I initially created. This gives us the best of both worlds because we retain those modular assets for efficiency. We can dress with them, we can build larger structures, and we can always update these assets at any point and it will propagate. throughout the project. But it also means we can handcraft each building. So I can spend the time to really craft a large structure with these pieces and not feel constrained by like grid snapping or like super strict modular approaches. And with that combo, I could really capture the wonky, aged, worn, and tapered aesthetic. So you can see these are some of the plaster pieces that we used and some of the rough vertex blending. I'm sure Luan's having a hernia right now looking at the vertex blending. And just combining those two with some of the roof shingles that we have, you can start forming structures such as this one. So it's not a lot of pieces, just sort of like Lego, and you can construct something like this and additional variations. So here I've highlighted the wood pieces that are used and where those are, and then also the plaster. I would have colored the roof, but I don't think it needs to be uniquely colored. But that's how that's broken down, and the windows are separate meshes. This is the asset library of buildings. Some of the larger pieces are constructed from the smaller ones. Some of the scales off, like the roof shingles on this big one, don't match, but you fix those as you noticed it. So overall, all of if not every structure in terms of building is assembled from this small kit, which has a positive effect because if you need to update assets, there's not many to update. And also restricting yourself in the assets that you use really makes sure the world feels consistent. Like if you have 200 different buildings, like it's very hard to make sure that they feel consistent. But if you have a small library such as this, you just need to make sure that these ones match the art style and everything else will follow suit. In terms of building the actual structures themselves, like I mentioned, I use individual assets to construct the larger structure, which you have here. But this still feels too perfect. It needs to go through the warping phase, essentially, and that's where we use deformers to get that warped effect. So once this was assembled, it would be converted to a blueprint as a safety net. So if we ever needed to update something, we can update it in the engine, and we have the blueprint version to work with and restart this process that we're at now. So this gets converted to a static mesh. And then in Maya, I would apply like a lattice, start warping the buildings, the roofs, like you can see here. And then from here, this gives us a foundation, a building that we can deploy anywhere in the world. But we don't want every single building looking exactly the same. So that gives us an opportunity to start making everything feel a bit more unique with some unique dressing. So we can start adding those wood pieces from our library, add a little balcony and some doors, start adding a fencing and some wooden panels, and then do the little bit of rough vertex blending. Also add a panel here. I've taken that from Luan's work recently, but something to store goods or props, and it just gives a nice line flow to the whole structure. And once you start adding roofs and chimneys to the building and some props, it really starts to bring everything together. But pretty much everything that isn't the building is separate. It can be changed in and out at any point. If I meet up with Luan and Branko and they want to change something on the design of the building, it's very easy to just take these doors and swap them to something else. We could add a third roof. So rather than constraining ourselves early on, this pipeline's pretty flexible. And I think as we've gone further in development, we've just opted to build the building as it is with pieces rather than converting it to a blueprint, but into a static mesh. We just construct it like you see here. And if it needs converting, then we can do that. So motivation. Sometimes people feel like Vivi in the background here, where you just want to drop dead or go to bed. So I think it's important to note that this project's almost 2 years old now, at least since I joined. I joined in January 2021, I think. I'm losing track of time, but it's been in production for a long time, so it's very easy to lose like motivation, passion, the drive to work on something for such a long period of time. And I'm sure people get that with their own personal projects where you just want to stop and start a new one. So hopefully the advice here is useful. with regards to Memoria, the biggest thing was setting milestones, um, not only for like the leaders, but also the general team so that they know what they're striving for. I think if the milestone is 6, 9 months away, it's a bit too far, but you want to make sure that they know what they're spending their free time on. Like if I ask someone to make a prop and it takes them 2 weeks of total time, like they want to know where that's going. So big motivation is seeing where your work ends up. Um, and it also goes hand in hand with team progress whips. So it's one thing to just show a final piece like the Courtyard trailer from the UE5 Vocal Slice or the original one. But they take ages to develop, and for the internal team, you want to show them progress, even if it's ugly. Like this is what I'm working on this week, and that kind of maybe there's the off chance that they forgot they were in the project and they realize, oh, that looks amazing. Like I want to start working on what I was tasked with a few days ago. Um, so it's just a good way to remind people, like we're all in this together. No one's getting paid. Excuse me. The other big one, this is useful again if you're working with multiple people in your personal projects. Like you want to make sure you have team-wide meetings, not just through Discord. Like you don't want to just type and talk. Like having like an actual video call where you can see the rest of the people that you're working with. If it's one person, 3, 5, 40, like we have, it just brings everyone together and they can actually ask questions live that they may be thinking of, and you can answer any like team-wide questions that need to be answered that some people may not know the next thing is that you're showing, and you can answer that question and it probably excites them. And the other big thing is sharing positive feedback from the community. So we've had a lot of like articles from IGN, I think all the big ones except Kotaku. If they're listening, please write something. But those articles talking about the work that we're pouring so much time into, it's always positive and it always resonates with us. Like we feel good and we want to get cracking even more with what we're building. The community is positive as well. So I think generally just surrounding yourself with people that don't just say nice things for the sake of it, but are actually like passionate about what you're building is always a good thing to make sure you don't like lose focus on what you're putting your time into. Cool. And this is one of the latest GIFs that we've created. I think it was posted on social media and kind of went viral. So this was a big take and brought in a lot of new talent recently, which kind of unlocked some capabilities. So really showing progress and whips of your work is a definite thing I recommend. You never know who's going to see it, and you never know who will like reach out because they've seen your work, and you may be surprised with the outcomes. And that is the end of my presentation. But if there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. No, go for it. We used plastic SCM. So Perforce was way too expensive. It's like $500 a user, and you need somewhere to host the files like on your machine. But the benefit of plastic once it's working is you only pay $8 a person, so it's really cheap. And then you only pay for like the storage that you use. So files is pretty cheap. And I say the other win, it does something that not many source control providers do, is it gives you the server, so you don't need to find a third party. Like with Perforce, you have to use like Amazon Web Service or like Azure from Microsoft to store the files, but Plastic is like an all-in-one package. So yeah, definitely what I'd recommend for small projects. Oh, good question. I guess if it's done to a good standard, I don't see a problem with it. Maybe I could find. I'll send the portfolio, but like Ranko's portfolio is full of fan art from like Final Fantasy, Metal Slug, all these other games that he grew up with, and he's worked at Riot, Blizzard, a few other big companies. So I don't think there's a bad thing. I just think the problem with fan art is the original's there, so people are going to compare it. And if it's not as good as the original, then it's like, you haven't really done it justice. And yeah, I don't think there's a problem with doing fan art. I think if your whole portfolio is just fan art, then that might be a problem. Having a few pieces is not a bad thing. Like my portfolio is basically fan art at the moment with what I do in my free time. So at the moment, it's not optimized, but it will be. Probably the short and sweet of it. But yeah, it's like I said, it's a proof of concept, but we still want to build it where we could get 60 frames per second. Um, so everything that kind of goes in the engine is built with like industry standard workflows in mind. So nothing's high poly, everything's baked down and unwrapped, and there's a low poly version of it. We didn't use Nanite for, it's when we started, it just came out, so it was something to stay away from just because it's so experimental and still being developed. Um, so yeah, as we were trying to reimagine what it would look like in 2022, we did want to make sure that like even if it's not playable, like it still runs if it were, essentially. Like we don't want to just turn it into a movie or have it running 2 frames per second, because what's the real point? And I think the last thing I'd mention on that is there's some team members with different graphics cards like 980s or 1080s. So you need to be considerate that they can open the engine and actually do work. I don't know if they mean a lot in this project or just the industry in general. I guess if you're asking the industry in general, like yes, it's definitely used a lot. Everyone does it a different way. I don't think there's like a you have to kit bash this way. Kit bash is just essentially like bashing assets together to make a larger structure. Um, the benefit is you can kind of reuse existing pieces. You don't have to keep making bespoke assets, like I mentioned with those unique buildings in some of the previous slides. I can spend the time crafting that. It's only for that location, but instead we put the time into building that library. You can kind of craft 80% of the buildings we need with that library. So it's definitely very, very useful. It's something a lot of studios use. Probably won't name them, the ones that I've worked at for obvious reasons, but they definitely do use kit bashing throughout. Just that everyone deploys it differently. Everything. No, the biggest challenge. I think I think staying motivated, to be honest, like because it's such a big task. And it takes so much time of your free time. Like I think my last like real personal project was 3 years ago now, if you don't include this. And you see a lot of people pumping out work and you're like, I wish I could do that as well. But then you have to remember you're building something enormous. Um, but yeah, I think the biggest task is just finding the time and drive to work on something that is going to take 2, 3, 3.5 years to finish. If it's a portfolio project, you can finish that in 1 or 2 months. But when you're putting so much time into a project that's not going to come to fruition for a long, long time, it can be draining. We only have one interior, but it's not built in the level because I'll be honest, I've ruined the scale when I was building Alexandria, so it just didn't work with Vivi. He's a silly scale to build to. Um, but in terms of like building interiors, you normally just it's the same way you construct the buildings with the I can cycle back, I guess, just to show the color work. It's fine. It's the same way where you put these walls and wood beams together to construct the larder foundation. Um, you would just make sure that there's enough interior space for it to be explorable. So for this, if there was a human, I'd probably increase the size of this building like 1.5, 2 times the existing size, just to make sure there's enough space for like the actual walls to be present, and then the living space inside matches real world metrics. Um, so it's no different to what I've done here. Like if I walk inside this building, like you could go inside and it would work. You would just need to cap off maybe the roof, maybe add a staircase or something for the second landing. But I very quickly found out the way I was like scale for these was just completely not what we needed. So we never attempted to make all of the buildings an interior. Um, I can get the number if that works. I don't know. There's at least 150, 200 just props. Um, maybe I can find that. Oh, never mind. There's at least like 300 individual props that have been made. That's not including the building pieces or like the foliage. There's purely just like barrels and sacks, crates, things like that. A lot of them are just variants of themselves. So like you may have trying to think of something. Like you may have like, a piece of ham, and then maybe there's another version of the same ham that's like cooked. So there's kind of the same asset, just a small texture tweak. So that counts as two in this example. But there's a lot of individual props that are just all hand sculpted and baked. Yeah, exactly. Pretty much. I mean, I can, yeah, like it would be kit bashed what we have here in Unreal. It was just quicker. Um, I got the workflow from the Rose Inn project. Again, I'll send a link where he was just kit bashing his buildings in Unreal, and I thought I'm just going to do that as well. And then the need for warping meant I had to convert it to something to take to Maya, and also having a blueprint with like 100 meshes is awful for performance. It was impossible to work with, so it would be assembled in Unreal, converted to a blueprint for couple purposes, and then taken to Maya and brought back. Um, One I can think of is the person redoing their asset now. But yeah, people redo assets. Um, Usually the process is someone will be, tasked up. So I always try and give them options because it's their free time. I don't want to force an asset on someone that they don't want to do that. Like it wouldn't make sense. I always give them the option. Um, and they'll work on it. They'll post it for feedback, and we normally break it up into stages. So there's the high poly stage, and then we'll review that when it's done and feedback. And there's the texture stage, and we'll review that. Don't really care about the low poly or um, the UV layout unless it's awful. If they have feedback during the high poly or texture stage, like they usually go and visit it. Um, we try to be a bit lenient with the feedback because again, it's a passion project. I don't want to nitpick every crack, or like every scratch that's on the asset. Just anything that reads weird at first glance, things that the form doesn't read well with the art style, things like that. So we try and be lenient, and if people get feedback where they have to revisit the asset, we try and make sure that is valid. I don't think any assets have been like restarted from scratch. Maybe just two or three out of the 300. Most of them are just small feedback, small tweaks, and then they finish. What was the first few words you broke up? Okay. Okay. Um, I'd like to say yes. We don't have as much red tape. So if that's a good thing for anyone, please apply. But yeah, there's not much red tape on Memoria. Like it's pretty free flowing. There's no producer. I have thought about it sometimes, but it just doesn't seem like I don't want to. We didn't want to turn it into a job. Like we don't want people to feel pressured to do something for next week. So producer had pros and cons, but I think it's very close to game dev to a certain degree. Um, just not as strict. Essentially, like for example, I asked Luan to work on a few areas, and he just cracks away with it. We don't really need to do back and forth or anything like that. I just trust him to work on those areas, and he does. Just like other people, you give them tasks and they do it. Whereas in game dev, you always have someone, for the most part, looking over your shoulder to make sure things are on time. But we're not like that. Do they mean the props or just everything? Or I can answer both, I guess. I don't know. Uh, Props were built in, so Trello was used to track all the props. So we'd list every asset, and um, they were categorized between areas. So we would have like a different column for like the ticket booth. We'd have a column for the courtyard, the tavern, the fountain district. And in that case, when we were working on the courtyard, we only allocated tasks from that column. So that was a good way for us to make sure we were working on things for the milestone we were trying to ship. That's for the props. Like I said, people can pick what they like for that regard. In terms of the level, I think for the most part, it was basically me dressing most of the levels in UE5 for a while. Um, so that was again split up based on like milestones. It was courtyard, then this area, and then the next area. And make sure I work on things that are consistent. But now in the UE5 build, we've got Luan helping me out, Dell, who's at Riot Games. He's helping out in the engine as well. So we're kind of breaking things up where we're not stepping on each other's toes. Um, and it just comes back to maintaining that fun factor. Like I want to make sure that Dell is working on stuff he wants to do, and Luan stuff that he has full creative freedom to just explore ideas. Um, and at the end of the day, you just make sure that they both enjoy what they're working on. So we've sort of split up the UE5 build in like, I guess, equal thirds for the most part. Cool. So yeah,